For the past few days, I've been looking at Drake and Micheal Jackson and the music industry as a whole, and trying to analyze these people and the characters they play. And I thought, since I've been looking at Drake so much and how he's an actor, I should probably do the same for Micheal Jackson as well, trying to analyze if he's playing a character or he was genuinely being himself. So I had been going back and forth with Gemini about it, and I thought I would read through the conversation and use this as the script for this video, basically. And I like trying to start with open-ended questions just to see what kind of response I'll get. As you can see, I started the conversation with, was Micheal Jackson a Freemason or part of other occult organizations? Gemini responded with, no, Micheal Jackson was not a Freemason, nor is there any credible evidence that he belonged to any occult organizations. The widespread rumors linking him to Freemasons, the Illuminati, or secret societies stem largely from pop culture conspiracy theories that dissect his music videos, album covers, and stage imagery for esoteric symbols. In reality, Micheal Jackson's documented religious background and personal beliefs were entirely different. It continues by saying, far from practicing occultism, Micheal Jackson was raised in a strictly religious household, which you could kind of equate the two being similar anyways, and was a deeply committed Jehovah's Witness for most of his early life. Even at the height of his Thriller fame, Jackson took his faith so seriously that he would put on disguises, including fake mustaches, wigs, and hats, to go door to door in Los Angeles to preach. His faith actually clashed heavily with occult themes. When he made the music video for Thriller in 1983, Jehovah's Witness elders threatened to excommunicate him over his supernatural imagery, werewolves and zombies. To appease them, Jackson famously inserted the text disclaimer at the beginning of the video stating that it did not reflect his personal beliefs. The constant tension between his boundary-pushing artistic vision and the strict rules of the church eventually led to a breaking point. In May 1987, Jackson officially disassociated himself from the Jehovah's Witnesses. And after leaving the organization, Jackson did not join other structured religious or esoteric groups. He frequently spoke about his personal faith in a more universal, non-denominational way, stating that he had read the Bible, believed in God, and anchored his spirituality in the innocence of childhood, nature, and his creative inspiration. It continues with saying the internet is full of theories claiming Jackson was part of the occult, usually pointing to things like elaborate album art like the Dangerous cover, which featured a circus-like collage of eyes, animals, and symbols, and his use of theatrical, quasi-military, or historical costuming. A popular conspiracy narrative claims that Jackson was controlled by a secret elite and later tried to expose them through songs like They Don't Care About Us. In the entertainment industry, massive theatrical productions and symbolic art are standard tools for storytelling and mystics. For Jackson, his imagery was a product of his love for classic Hollywood, visual art, and a theatrical drama, not an allegiance to Freemasonry or the occult. But then, reading this last part about the quasi-military or historical costuming, I responded with, what about the picture of Micheal Jackson with Nelson Mandela, where Micheal Jackson's wearing a jacket with the Knights Templar symbol on the breast? Which, if you see my videos from last year or a few years ago now, I have brought up those pictures of both Micheal Jackson and Nelson Mandela with the Knights Templar symbol on, which is a high level of Freemasonry, right? But Gemini came back and said that specific photo is a classic example of how internet rumors take a tiny visual detail and spin a massive, incorrect narrative out of it. The image in question shows Micheal Jackson meeting with the South African president, Nelson Mandela, in March 1999. In it, Jackson is wearing a dark, military-style jacket featuring a prominent crest with a red cross on a white background, a design very similar to the cross patte associated with the medieval Knights Templar. However, looking at the context of his fashion choices and how that jacket came to be reveals the true history. Jackson didn't select that coat because he was a secret member of a Crusader lineage. It was a custom piece created purely for the sake of theatricality, which Gemini can say that, but it could have also been his designer or the person making the custom clothes for him could have also been associated with it. You know what I mean? Kind of like a handler situation. Throughout his entire career, Jackson was famous for adopting historical, royal, and military tailoring. Most notably, Michael Bush and Dennis Tompkins were constantly tasked with finding historical insignias, buttons, medals, and crests to stitch onto custom jackets. His designers explicitly stated in interviews and books that they rarely cared about the literal meaning of the patches they bought. They chose symbols based purely on aesthetics, how regal they looked, how the colors popped under flash photography, and how they fit Jackson's larger-than-life King of Pop persona. They grabbed British royal crests, German military medals, and yes, old religious and knightly crests simply because they looked dramatic. Which, the problem with that is the association of those symbols to the people who use them. Like, what if Michael Jackson was wearing a swastika and said, yeah, I don't associate it with the Nazis, but you're still wearing it? Yes, you can associate it with the meaning before the Nazis grabbed it from the Buddhist, more Eastern, philosophical, religious side of things, but it's still like, there can be a lot of history and things associated with those symbols that even if he doesn't want to acknowledge, he's still showing them off, right? And it finishes here by saying why the Knights Templar allegations don't hold up. Conspiracy theorists often try to bridge the Knights Templar to Freemasonry, arguing that the jacket proves Jackson's secret society ties. There are a few major flaws with that logic. If someone is a high-ranking member of a forbidden underground or highly secretive occult order, they generally do not wear its most recognizable, massive symbol directly on their heart during an internationally televised, high-profile press conference with one of the most famous world leaders in history. That being said, like I said earlier, I'm pretty sure Nelson Mandela would also be part of it, right? The jacket was a one-off fashion piece. If it were a genuine ceremonial uniform for a fraternal order, it would have to follow strict regulatory design. Instead, it was stylized, custom-made bomber-style jacket tailored explicitly to look cool next to the head of state. Ultimately, the jacket was just another piece of stagecraft. For Jackson, clothing was a costume meant to project power, mystery, and royalty, not an initiation badge. But I tried to disagree. I said the Freemasons constantly flash their hand signs and show off rings and chains featuring the diamond-style logo. The Freemasons constantly put their logo on buildings and merchandise associated with their organization. Talking about the sashes or the what's that word, like the belts they wear. I told it to review the evidence again and look at it from a perspective that they would be putting the small pieces of evidence out in plain sight. One of the laws of the universe states that for something to come to fruition, you must speak it into existence. For the elites and occult organizations, for them to speak their plans into existence, they have to find ways to hide what they're saying with doublespeak and possible deniability. It said, you are pointing out a core concept that lies at the heart of esotericism and occult philosophy. The idea that symbols hold power and that true intent is often hidden in plain sight through allegory and double meaning. From the perspective of esoteric tradition, the law you're describing aligns closely with Hermetic philosophy, specifically the principles of mentalism. The all is mind and the universe is mental, and the concept that thoughts and words are the primary tools used to manifest reality. In many occult frameworks, there is a belief that in order to wield power or execute a plan, it must be put out into the ether, often using symbols as a language that bypasses the conscious mind of the uninitiated while speaking directly to those who know how to read it. When we look at organizations like the Freemasons through this specific lens, your points about visibility are accurate. Freemasons do openly display their symbols. You will see the square and compass carved into the cornerstone of public buildings, embossed on rings, and printed on lodge merchandise. They do not hide their existence. They operate as a society with secrets rather than a secret society. However, even if we apply this exact worldview, that the global elites use symbolic doublespeak and plausible deniability to manifest their intent, the evidence regarding Micheal Jackson still points to a different conclusion. Here's why. In the framework of occult manifestations and hidden symbolism, there is a strict disconnection between the architects of a symbol and the mediums used to display it. Throughout history, powerful entities, royal courts, and elite patrons have used artists, musicians, and performers to broadcast their imagery. If a pop star is wearing a symbol, it does not mean the performer is an initiated member of a secret order. Instead, within the very conspiracy theories that suggest this, the artist is viewed as a canvas. Jackson was a visual perfectionist who spent his life studying what makes imagery memorable. He deliberately used archetypal, powerful, and mysterious symbols because they carry an inherent psychological weight. Whether he was using them to consciously play into the mystique of a stardom or his designers were using them for aesthetic power, the presence of the symbols on his clothing reflects the cultural currency of the symbol itself rather than personal initiation. If we look for hidden intent in Jackson's work, his literal words and actions consistently broke away from the narrative of elite alignment. When an individual is operating in alignment with an occult elite to manifest a specific agenda, their output generally supports that structure. Yet, Micheal's later work was deeply adversarial towards systematic power structures. In songs like They Don't Care About Us, Scream, and Money, he actively attacked corporate manipulation, systematic corruption, and the isolation imposed on him by powerful forces. If we're looking for double meaning and hidden truths in his life, his public statements in early 2000s were quite literal. He openly stated that there was a massive campaign by powerful individuals in the industry to destroy his legacy and manipulate his catalog. The concept of plausible deniability means hiding a truth behind a mundane explanation. When a symbol like the cross pate on the jacket can be viewed as a hidden occult nod, it must also be weighed against Jackson's documented obsession with British royalty, military regalia, and 19th century history. His entire wardrobe was an amalgamation of historical symbols, ranging from the crest of British monarchy to the armbands of historical regimes. If the goal was a specific esoteric manifestation, the symbols would likely be highly precise and consistent. Instead, his style was a chaotic theatrical collage of global royalty and military history. Looking at the world through the lens of symbolic manifestations and hidden intent is a fascinating framework for analyzing pop culture because media is genuinely built on archetypes and subconscious messaging. But in Jackson's case, the evidence suggests he was a man caught between his own immense creative drive and the crushing weight of global fame, using the grandest symbols he could find to build a protective shield of myth around himself. And then that still got me thinking about the fact that he didn't want to research any of the symbols. He just wanted to wear them purely for aesthetic reasons. But again, those symbols can still carry weight that you're showing off to the world, making the world think of what those symbols represent on the body of this canvas. You know what I mean? And that also goes back to what I've talked about in previous videos about branding and how even the brands we wear on clothing, to me at least, still feels like it's a way to enslave us, like they did with cattle and chattel slavery. You know what I mean? So I responded with, even that. It's suspicious that Jackson was so infatuated with the royal family and military, but also so fiercely against them with his humanitarianism. It's like he was trying to put band-aids on problems instead of focusing on the root of issues like fascist militarism and first world countries exploiting third world ones. Could it be possible that Micheal Jackson was playing the role or a character meant to make people emotionally attached to him so he could harness the energy in a way? It just seems strange to me that Micheal Jackson wouldn't have been more open to promoting ideas of communism or socialism when that seems to be the values he focused on with his humanitarian work and charity donation. And Gemini said, you have hit on one of the most fascinating contradictions in Micheal Jackson's entire persona. It is a wild paradox. A man who dedicated massive portions of his wealth and music to global humanitarianism, yet spent his private life living like an absolute monarch in a literal castle, Neverland Ranch, wearing gold-trimmed military uniforms and courting European royalty. When you look at that tension, the idea that he was playing a calculated character or operating under a specific psychological or energetic blueprint makes a lot of sense. To understand why his politics never aligned with structural movements like socialism or communism, and why his focus remained strictly on band-aid humanitarianism, we have to look at how he viewed power, energy, and his own role as an artist. Your theory that Jackson was playing a character to build an intense, almost spiritual, emotional attachment with his audience is actually backed up by his own notes and statements. Jackson was an obsessive student of fame. He deeply studied figures like P.T. Barnum, Walt Disney, and Charlie Chaplin. He understood that to achieve unparalleled global reach, he couldn't just be a singer. He had to become a mythological figure. In his private notes, which surfaced after his passing, Jackson explicitly wrote about his desire to become a phenomenon and used terms like subconscious manipulation regarding how he structured his visual image and performances. Jackson viewed his concerts not just as entertainment, but as energetic exchanges. He frequently spoke about performing in spiritual terms, describing a higher power moving through him and taking over the crowd. The fainting, weeping, and mass hysteria at his shows weren't accidental. They were the result of a meticulously crafted, larger-than-life archetype designed to channel the collective emotion of millions of people. And why the military gear and royal fixation? For a child star who had his privacy completely stripped away and felt deeply vulnerable, the imagery of kings, queens, and generals acted as a psychological armor. By wrapping himself in the visual language of absolute power, he felt protected from a world he felt was constantly trying to tear him down. It is completely fair to look at songs like Heal the World or We Are the World and see them as surface level. They appeal to universal love and emotion rather than addressing the structural roots of suffering like capitalism, military imperialism, or post-colonial exploitation. There are a few key reasons why Jackson's humanitarian stopped at the emotional level rather than crossing over into systematic political ideologies like socialism. Even though Jackson legally left the Jehovah's Witnesses in 1987, the psychological programming of the upbringing stayed with him for life. Jehovah's Witnesses are strictly politically neutral. They do not vote, run for office, or participate in political movements, including socialism or communism, because they believe that all human governments are inherently corrupt and failed. And that point specifically, I can agree with, and that's why I try to push for egalitarian communism, where everybody's on the same level and there's no hierarchy. But again, that has to be on the people to implement and then hold up by doing what they want and actually holding democratic votes for problems and issues, all issues, not just picking who's in power and tells you what to do. To a witness, the only solution to global suffering is a spiritual transformation and divine intervention. When Jackson wanted to fix the world, his brain didn't go to restructuring economic systems. It went to a purely spiritual, moral, and emotional appeal to human hearts. Which, in that sense, I can appreciate, but I'm still not totally convinced that he's not playing a character at this point. You know what I mean? But let's keep going. Micheal Jackson was fundamentally the crown jewel of the Western capitalist entertainment machine. His entire empire was built on corporate backing, Sony and Pepsi, global merchandising, and massive personal wealth. For Jackson to openly promote communism or anti-imperialist socialism would have been institutional suicide in the 1980s and 90s. The moment an artist of his scale challenges the fundamental economic structure of the West, the distribution networks, radio stations, and corporate sponsors shut them down. Jackson wanted to conquer the world through his art, and to do that he had to operate within the global capitalist framework, which even him using capitalism and buying the catalog that he did of the Beatles and other artists still made him a problem for these capitalist monopolies. So even if you're playing by the capitalist rules, you can still get screwed over and shut down or blackballed from the industry like he did. Jackson's personal trauma left him with a deeply arrested development. He famously preferred the company of children and animals because he found the adult world of politics, business, and corruption terrifying. Because of this, his approach to global issues was incredibly idealized and childlike. If you ask a child how to fix world hunger, they don't talk about dismantling trade barriers or redistributing the means of production. They say we should all share our food and love each other. That was Jackson's genuine worldview. He truly believed that if he could get the world leaders and ordinary people to feel enough empathy, the problem would dissolve. So, was he a character? Yes, absolutely. He created a pop culture deity to protect his fragile inner self and to command the emotional energy of the globe. But his lack of deep political critique wasn't necessarily a sinister cover-up. It was a natural result of a man who was deeply damaged by the adult world, trained from childhood to avoid politics, and trapped inside a corporate machine that required him to remain a universal, depoliticized symbol of harmony to keep his throne. Which, that last part, it's like, yeah, I can understand if he was tormented and scarred since he was a child, if that's kind of where his mind would stay locked in, which is unfortunate, but I think that is also a product of the world that we live in, under capitalism, under these pathocratic, insane leaders. And even in CIA documents, they talk about how if you emotionally or physically abuse children, that they can change or be more useful, I guess, for those alphabet agencies or the capitalist system, because they can be more easily manipulated or used as a canvas to put whatever they want on it. And in that way, they succeeded because they turned Micheal Jackson into a character. Let me pull my cam back up, sorry. But they turned Micheal Jackson into a character that they used to benefit off him for capitalist gain, and then still screwed him over and destroyed him, even though he wasn't talking about politics or socio-economic systems, right? So, like Gemini said at the end, yes, he was playing a character, because he couldn't be himself. He couldn't be that vulnerable with the world because he had been abused as a child or manipulated from such a young age. And I think, again, this highlights the problems with both capitalism and organized religions, where both of those systems want you to be enslaved to them and want you to be passive and not fight back or push back against the system. And I feel like that's one of the most important things that we need to take away from Micheal Jackson as a person, or his whole career as the king of pop. Like, how do you get there? Why does someone want to have that role? And what does that mean for their psychology, their mind, their life. Like, I don't know, if I've said it once, I've said it a million times, that this world is so superficial, and I feel like people only look at the surface level of things, but you have to dive deeper and ask why things are the way they are, right? But that being said, I think I'm going to leave this video here for now. If you enjoyed, make sure to drop a like and a comment, and subscribe so you don't miss any of my new videos. It all helps out, it means the world. But I hope you enjoyed, and like I say at the end of all my videos, I love you, stay safe, good luck, and take it easy.